Welcome to Standard 12C and the end of World War II. In this standard, we will try to explain the outcomes, the effects, or the lasting legacies of World War II. As you might imagine, this was one of the biggest, if not the biggest event in at least modern world history, so there's going to be quite a few outcomes and effects that we'll take a look at in this standard. We have a couple of essential questions we're trying to answer in this standard. First of all, we have, as the standard stated, what were the outcomes of World War II. We want to be familiar with this term war crime trials. War crimes were a new term applied to some of the horrific things done during World War II. We'll take a look at the war crime trials. Some additional essential questions. How did the Allies promote reconstruction of the defeated powers? We're going to see a different approach by the victorious Allies to the countries that they defeat than we saw at the end of World War I. And then finally, what international organizations were created after World War II in an effort to try and keep the peace. So we'll go ahead and take a look at these one at a time. As we mentioned already, one of the outcomes is this idea of war crimes. Many horrific things done during World War II, of course, probably most infamous of all, the genocide committed in the Holocaust, and the world wanted to hold people accountable for that. The world didn't want to say, well, anything is justified in war, that there were some things that were just too horrible to do, and the Holocaust rose to that level. So the Nazi leaders, the ones who survived, a lot of the top level leaders like Hitler killed themselves and didn't stand trial, but those who were still around, they were put on trial in what became known as the Nuremberg trials. Nuremberg is a city in Germany, and so seeking justice for the victims of the Holocaust. Here we see some of the top Nazi leaders there with guards behind them as they were put on trial. Many of them were found guilty, and many of those were then executed for their crimes. It set a precedent that still holds today, that there are things that are unacceptable in war, and leaders, military and political leaders, can be held accountable for their actions during times of war. Okay, a second outcome of World War II, those big empires that European colonial powers had built starting in the mid-1800s and lasting through World War II, they're all going to start to crumble and disappear. These empires are lost by the European colonial powers in a process that becomes known as decolonization. Over the next 20-25 years, pretty much all of the colonies held by European countries, they're going to become independent countries. For example, the English at the start of World War II, their empire covered 20% of the world's population. 1 out of every 5 people on the planet was a member of the British Empire. That within 20 years of the end of World War II is pretty much going to disappear. All England pretty much has left a few places, few islands in the Caribbean, and not a whole lot else. Okay, because the destruction was so total in Europe, these colonial powers, England, France, Belgium, they're just so destroyed by World War II, as we see in this picture. They can barely take care of themselves, let alone colonies. And the colonies will see this as an opportunity to declare their independence and go off on their own. Okay, we see, for example, this map of the Eastern Hemisphere. Everything that's not that yellowish color was a colony at the beginning of World War II. We see, for example, almost all of Africa at the beginning of World War II was a colony. We see all of South Asia was colonies of European countries, pretty much all of Southeast Asia. And the numbers, the years indicate when these countries became independent countries of their own. And we notice most of these are in the late 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. World War II did so much damage to the colonial powers that they could no longer hold on to their colonies. Okay, our third outcome here we kind of mentioned in outcome number 2. European countries were so destroyed and so devastated. The United States, looking across the Atlantic, really didn't suffer any physical damage aside from Pearl Harbor in the war. The United States emerges with its economy in really good shape, but looking at Europe as beaten up and destroyed as it was, realized that the world's economy needed Europe back on its feet, and the United States needed Europe back on its feet in order to trade. So unlike World War I, where the victorious Allies took money from Germany, George Marshall, the U.S. general who was then Secretary of State after World War II, sees scenes like this, the destruction in England, the ruined cities in Germany, and instead decides to pump billions of dollars into Europe. Okay, we see it here in this map showing the height of the dollar sign, showing how much money went to various countries, England and France really receiving most of the money, but even Italy and Germany, who the United States had fought against, received money. We notice the photograph on the right. Even if you don't read, even if you don't read German, you can still make out Marshall Plan here. This is a project being funded by Marshall Plan money. You see here the German city of Frankfurt before and after Marshall Plan money. Here on the left we see after World War II, and we'll focus in on this area here in the circle, and the picture on the right is 10 years later, and we can see kind of the same area of the picture. This is the same scene 10 years later, and we see how much building and repair went on with all of this money supplied by the Marshall Plan. Okay, outcome number 4. Our next 3 really get us into our next standard, Standard 13, the Cold War. World War II ends with the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as what become known as superpowers. Both of these countries emerged, the United States during World War II and the Soviet Union fairly soon after, with atomic weapons, which give them militarily and psychologically a huge advantage over other countries of the world. And we're going to see the world divide really into 2 camps, one behind the United States, one behind the Soviet Union, represented in the cartoon here by their two symbols, Uncle Sam on the left and the bear, which we'll see a lot of in Standard 13, representing the Soviet Union. Okay, on that same line, we see this term, the Iron Curtain, used to describe Europe after World War II. Even though the United States, England, and Soviet Union were friends and allies during during World War II, they never really were best of friends. And after the war ends, the divisions that existed between them before the war are going to open up again. England and the United States are going to go one way, the Soviet Union goes the other way. We see in this picture here the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill giving a speech at Westminster College in Missouri in 1946, in which he described what he saw going on in Europe as an Iron Curtain. Okay, and Europe pretty much divided down the middle. Churchill said, as we see here in the quote, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. If we look at that map, pretty much what he's describing is the borderline between the blue and the red areas. The countries in blue in Western Europe, they were the democracies, capitalist economies. Those who were in the United States camp, the countries in red were the communist totalitarian states that largely followed the Soviet Union. Okay, we see in our political cartoon, the Iron Curtain was not an actual thing. There was no actual physical Iron Curtain. It was a symbol of this divide that was growing between Eastern and Western Europe that we'll see more of in Standard 13. Okay, number 6, along that same line, the two parts divided by the Iron Curtain, they're really, for the most part, there are some exceptions, they're going to form into the two rival alliances of the Cold War. Okay, NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, symbolized in blue. This was the side led by the United States, and the Warsaw Pact, symbolized here in red and led by the Soviet Union. These are the two sides that are going to emerge and face off in the Cold War. Okay, outcome number 7. We do see after World War II, just like we saw after World War I, the formation of international organizations meant to keep the peace. The United Nations replaces the League of Nations as the main peacekeeping organization in the world. The United States, who didn't join the League of Nations after World War I, it's a little harder for it not to join the United Nations because it's right here in the United States. Okay, so we want to know the United Nations as an outcome of World War II. One of the things the United Nations creates and passes soon after its formation was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, and the idea behind this, it was a written document that most countries of the world have signed, and it's meant to protect the dignity and equal and inalienable rights that all members of the human family possess. Those natural rights, let's go back to the Enlightenment that John Locke first wrote about, this document is meant to protect. Okay, and then our last two have to do with how the defeated powers were treated. The reconstruction of Germany. Germany, once again, we've seen it so often in this course, gets divided yet again. It gets divided up between England, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union for the purposes of rebuilding it. Each of these colors, the green, the yellow, the pink, and the orange, are supposed to be returned to Germany after the rebuilding process. That yellow section that says East Germany, the Soviets are going to hold on to. Okay, so Germany is divided into what become known as West Germany, the democratic side, and East Germany, the communist side. The same is true for the capital of Berlin, where West Berlin is a democracy, East Berlin was a communist area. Okay, as West Germany develops, it's going to follow a capitalist model, and the economy is going to do much better in West Germany. West Germany develops as an economic power. We'll see at the end of Standard 13 in the early 1990s, Germany reunifies into Germany we know today. Okay, and then the last outcome we need to know was the reconstruction of Japan. The United States occupies Japan for a period of time after World War II. Douglas MacArthur, the U.S. general who defeated Japan, is going to take over and rule Japan almost as a dictator for a few years. Okay, we see the emperor standing next to MacArthur there. Okay, we're going to see Japan demilitarized. Japan gives up its military, as we see the general in the picture surrendering his sword. So Japan pretty much gets rid of most of its military power. Japan is going to become a democracy. It's going to give up sort of the way it was during World War II with a divine emperor and become a democracy where people choose their leaders. Okay, and just like Germany, an outcome of World War II is Japan is also going to emerge from World War II as an economic power. Okay, and those are the things we need to know as outcomes of World War II.